The store looked ordinary from the outside, bright banners in the windows, customers drifting in and out with shopping bags, sunlight spilling across polished glass. To anyone passing by, it was just another successful branch of a billion-dollar empire. But inside, behind a door marked Employees Only, the truth was bleeding quietly. The man who entered that morning didn't look like anyone special. He wore a plain brown coat, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. His shoes were scuffed, the kind you'd expect on a tired traveler, not on the Forbes list. No one noticed him slip past the aisles, moving like a shadow. He wasn't there to shop. He pushed open the restroom door, expecting the usual sterile quiet. Instead, he froze. In the corner, on his knees with a mop still in his hand, a janitor wept silently. He was an older black man, his shoulders shaking, his uniform soaked through with sweat. The sound of his sobs filled the tiled room, raw and unguarded. He didn't know anyone was watching. The undercover visitor lingered in the doorway, his breath caught. Something about the sight. This man, broken in a place where no one was supposed to look, cut deeper than he expected. For a moment, he considered walking away. That would have been easy. Just a stranger stumbling into someone else's grief. But his feet stayed planted. The janitor whispered to himself, words barely audible over the echo. "I can't do this anymore. I can't." The man in the coat felt his chest tighten. He had built an empire. He had believed his leadership philosophies, his company culture, his so-called vision had created something just and strong. And yet, here inside his very own store was a man breaking apart. He clenched his fists inside his coat pockets. No one here knew who he really was. To them, he was just another customer, a curious face. But behind the disguise was the truth. He was the founder, the billionaire CEO, and this was his company. And now, for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he understood it at all. The janitor finally looked up, startled by the shadow in the doorway. His red, swollen eyes widened. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean—" The disguised man shook his head quickly. "Don't apologize. Please, just tell me what's wrong." The janitor hesitated, then lowered his gaze. The mop clattered to the floor. His silence said more than words could. The man in the brown coat stepped forward, the weight of a billion-dollar empire pressing down on his shoulders. Whatever he had believed about his company, about leadership, about success, everything was about to be tested, and he knew instinctively that nothing would ever be the same. The sunlight streamed through the wide glass doors as he stepped back into the main sales floor. Customers shuffled between racks of neatly folded clothes and shelves stacked with home goods. The music overhead was cheerful, calculated to encourage buying. Everything looked polished too polished, he thought. Like a stage set. The man in the brown coat adjusted his cap, blending into the flow of shoppers. To the staff, he was invisible, just another face. That was exactly how he wanted it. He drifted toward a checkout counter. A young black cashier was scanning items for a customer, her movements careful, almost stiff. Behind her stood the store manager, a tall white man in a sharp suit that looked more suited to a boardroom than a retail floor. His smile was thin, his eyes sharp, watching her every move like a hawk. "You missed the barcode again," the manager snapped, loud enough for customers to hear. "How many times do I have to remind you? Efficiency is everything." The cashier flushed, mumbling an apology as she tried again. The disguised CEO watched closely. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the kind of humiliation designed to make someone smaller. When the customer left, the man in the coat stepped up to the counter, setting down a pair of socks he'd picked up just for cover. "How's your day going?" he asked softly. The cashier glanced nervously at the manager before answering, "Fine, sir." Her smile was forced. The manager interjected before she could say more. "If you need anything, I'll take care of it." His voice carried an edge, as if daring the cashier to speak freely. The undercover CEO tilted his head. "I think she was doing just fine helping me." The manager's eyes narrowed. For a split second, their gazes locked. The CEO saw something cold there, contempt. Not just for the cashier, but for anyone who dared challenge him. He paid and moved on, but his thoughts raced. In the aisle of cleaning supplies, he noticed another worker, a Latino stocker, carefully arranging bottles on a shelf. A customer asked him where to find a product. Before he could answer, the manager barked from across the aisle, "Don't stand around chatting. Back to work." The customer frowned, confused. The stalker muttered an apology and returned to stacking bottles. The disguised man's jaw tightened. He had toured countless stores as the CEO, announced and escorted, with managers smiling, workers lining up in rehearsed pride. Never once had he seen this. Of course not. They had always known when he was coming. Here, unannounced in plain clothes, he was seeing his company as it truly was. He wandered deeper, listening. Two employees whispered near the fitting rooms, their voices hushed but urgent. "They cut our hours again," said its budget. "But the schedule still says the same workload." "What can we do?" "If we complain, we're out." The words sliced through him. He had spent years writing speeches about fairness, about empowerment. Yet here in the walls that bore his company's logo, his people were drowning. The man in the brown coat moved slowly toward the back of the store, where the hallways narrowed and the fluorescent lights dimmed. He passed a locked office door. Through the glass, he caught a glimpse of the manager, smiling into his phone. "Don't worry," the man was saying. "They'll never push back. They need this job too much." The CEO froze in the hallway, his hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just a bad day. This wasn't just one employee's misfortune. Something rotten was embedded here, under the surface of his empire. And though no one in the building knew it yet, he intended to uncover it all. The hum of the store faded as he slipped once more toward the back corridors. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh white glow across the scuffed linoleum floors. He passed stacks of cardboard boxes and cleaning carts left unattended. The cheerful music of the sales floor was gone here. Only silence and the faint drip of a leaking pipe remained. The janitor was there again, kneeling by a bucket, mop in hand. His movements were slow, his eyes swollen from crying earlier. He didn't notice the man in the brown coat until the stranger spoke. "Are you all right?" The janitor startled, glancing up quickly. "Oh, sir, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I'll get out of your way." He reached for the mop as if to defend himself with work. "You don't have to apologize," the undercover CEO said softly. He crouched slightly, lowering his voice. "You looked upset before. I just wanted to check." The older man hesitated. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, he let out a bitter laugh. "You wouldn't understand. People like you don't see what happens back here." "Try me," the man in the coat replied. The janitor's hands trembled around the mop handle. His voice cracked as he spoke. "They cut my hours, but doubled my workload. They said if I complain, I'll be replaced. They say I should be grateful to even have this job. Grateful." His eyes glistened and his voice dropped lower. "But grateful doesn't pay my bills. Grateful doesn't feed my daughter." The undercover CEO felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say, "I do understand. More than you think." But he swallowed the words. The janitor pressed on, his emotions spilling out like water from a cracked pipe. "I've worked here 8 years. 8 years. Never late, never missed a shift. And still, they treat me like garbage. The manager screams at me in front of customers. They tell me to use broken equipment, unsafe chemicals. Last week I asked for gloves, just gloves, and he said, 'Not in the budget? Not in the budget.'" He slammed the mop into the bucket, water splashing onto the floor. The CEO flinched, but not from the splash, from the shame. He had sat in executive meetings where numbers danced on spreadsheets, where budgets were debated, where costs were trimmed. He had nodded at phrases like lean operations and maximum efficiency. He had never once thought about what those numbers meant for men like this, kneeling in bleach-soaked uniforms, begging for gloves. The janitor's voice dropped again, breaking into a whisper. "Sometimes I think they'd be happier if I just disappeared, if people like me weren't here at all." The CEO's heart clenched. He leaned closer. "No one should ever feel that way." The janitor shook his head. "It's the way of things. People at the top don't care. They just want the numbers to look good. We're just..." He hesitated, his voice breaking. "We're just disposable." For a moment, the man in the brown coat nearly broke character. He almost said, "You're not disposable. I built this company, and I care." But he caught himself. Instead, he placed a hand gently on the janitor's shoulder. "Thank you for telling me. I promise. Someone's listening now." The janitor gave him a weary look. a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Strangers don't change anything. The CEO straightened slowly, the weight of the man's words pressing into him like iron. Maybe not, he said quietly, but sometimes it only takes one stranger to start. The janitor turned back to his mop, his movements heavy with exhaustion. The man in the brown coat walked away, fists clenched in his pockets, a storm building in his chest. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if he was leading an empire or presiding over something rotten at its core. The store lights faded behind him as evening settled over the city. Neon signs flickered to life along the street, and the smell of fried food drifted from a diner on the corner. The man in the brown coat pulled his cap lower, slipping inside. It was the kind of place where the tables were sticky, the coffee cheap, and the jukebox in the corner hadn't worked in years. Perfect for disappearing into the background. He ordered nothing more than a cup of coffee, black, and sat in a booth near the window. From here, he had a view of the store across the street, its bright corporate logo glowing against the darkening sky. He had once taken pride in that logo. Now it felt like a mask. A group of employees entered the diner a few minutes later, still in uniform, their name tags catching the neon light. They slid into a booth 2 tables away, too tired to notice him. He kept his eyes on his coffee, but tilted his ear toward their conversation. Another shift without breaks, one woman muttered, rubbing her temples. And if I ask again, the manager says, I'm lazy. They cut my hours again, a young man added bitterly. But they keep making me cover for no-shows. I'm working the same, getting paid less. How does that even make sense? They don't care, the first woman replied. We're just numbers. Replaceable. I heard Maria got fired last week for being 5 minutes late. 5 minutes, after 3 years of perfect attendance. The disguised CEO's grip tightened around his mug. Another voice chimed in soft, weary. You think corporate cares? They don't. They just see profit margins. And guys like us, we're the cost. You can't complain when you're the cost. Laughter followed, but it wasn't joy. It was hollow, sharp, the laughter of people who had stopped expecting change. The man in the brown coat felt the weight of their words press against his chest. He remembered boardroom presentations filled with glossy charts. He remembered executives assuring him that our stores are running efficiently. He remembered nodding, congratulating them, believing the numbers. Now, he heard the reality behind those numbers, unfiltered and raw. The waitress refilled his cup, eyeing him curiously. You work with them? She asked, nodding toward the booth of employees. He shook his head, just passing through. She shrugged. Good. Place chews people up. I see them in here every night, dragging themselves home. Breaks your heart. He forced a thin smile, but his insides churned. The employees finished their meal quickly, splitting the check with coins and crumpled bills. As they left, their laughter quieted, their shoulders slumped, their eyes already dreading the next shift. The CEO watched them cross the street back toward the glow of his company's logo. It felt almost grotesque-like, a beacon calling them back into chains. He sat there long after they were gone, staring into the dregs of his coffee. The diner's neon sign flickered in the window reflection, spelling out a single word in broken light. Open. Open. That was what he needed to be. Open to the truth. Open to the possibility that the empire he had built was suffocating the very people it was meant to empower. When he finally rose to leave, he didn't look back at the store. He couldn't. The next morning, the man in the brown coat returned. The store gleamed in the daylight, its spotless windows promising opportunity and order. But he had already seen behind the curtain, and the shine only made the rot more visible. He walked slowly through the aisles, feigning interest in displays. A sales associate greeted him politely, but her eyes darted nervously toward the front desk. The manager was there again, towering over the registers, his sharp suit immaculate, his expression impatient. The disguised CEO wandered toward the checkout, pretending to examine a rack of gift cards. That was when it happened. A young black cashier, barely 20, was struggling to keep up with a long line. Her scanner beeped, then jammed. She tapped it, trying to reset. The customer waiting sighed, shifting from foot to foot. The manager swooped in like a hawk. Useless, he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. He snatched the scanner from her hand. How many times do I have to show you? This is not complicated. The cashier stammered. I'm sorry, sir, Sorry doesn't fix inefficiency, he barked, his voice cutting through the store. Other customers turned to watch. If you can't handle this, maybe you don't belong here. The young woman's face flushed crimson. She lowered her head, whispering, I'll do better. The disguised CEO felt his blood burn. Every instinct screamed to step forward, to reveal himself, to end this cruelty with a single sentence. I am your boss. But he forced himself to remain silent. Instead, he slipped a hand into his coat pocket, pressing a button on his phone. The screen glowed faintly as it began to record video. Through the lens, he captured the scene. The cashier's trembling hands, the manager's sneer, the customer's awkward silence. A public humiliation staged as discipline. The manager thrust the scanner back at her. Fix it, now, and smile while you're at it. Customers don't like sad faces. Her lips quivered as she forced a hollow grin. The disguised CEO's jaw tightened. He had sat through endless seminars on customer experience. He had never imagined it was enforced through fear. He moved down the aisle, slipping the phone back into his pocket, his pulse racing. He felt like a spy in enemy territory. Except the enemy was his own creation. Near the electronics section, he overheard two employees whispering, Did you see what he just did to Jasmine? Yeah. And if she complains, she's gone. That's how it works. Does corporate even know? A bitter laugh. Corporate doesn't care. They just care that the numbers look good. The disguised CEO turned away quickly, afraid they might see the fury in his eyes. He headed toward the back of the store, where the shelves thinned out and the atmosphere quieted. There, he found the janitor again, pushing his cart slowly, eyes downcast. The man in the coat almost approached him, but stopped. Not yet. He needed more than stories. He needed proof. As he walked toward the exit, the store manager's voice rang out again. Remember, people, efficiency is everything. Don't waste time, don't waste money, and don't waste my patience. The CEO paused, glancing back one last time. His phone was heavy in his pocket, holding the truth that could no longer be ignored. For the first time in his life, he realized, leadership wasn't about efficiency. It was about humanity, and his empire had forgotten it. The warehouse smelled of dust and cardboard. Pallets of inventory stacked to the ceiling created narrow alleys that muffled sound from the sales floor. It was quieter here, the hum of fluorescent lights mixing with the clatter of a pallet jack. The man in the brown coat slipped inside casually, as though he'd wandered too far. A young Latino stalker glanced up, startled, then relaxed when he saw just another customer. Sorry, the CEO said with a faint smile. Looking for the restroom. This place is a maze. The stalker chuckled. Yeah, tell me about it. He lowered his voice, glancing over his shoulder. Name manager doesn't like anyone back here who isn't moving boxes. If he catches you... His words trailed off, but his eyes told the story. Fear. Constant, gnawing fear. The disguised CEO leaned against a crate, voice low. Does he always ride you that hard? The stalker hesitated. Then, with a weary sigh, he said, It's not just him. It's the whole system. Hours cut, quotas raised. You miss one target, they blacklist you. Blacklist? The CEO echoed. Yeah. The young man rubbed his forehead. There's this list unofficial, but everyone knows. If your name's on it, forget about transfers, promotions, or even stable hours. They call it performance tracking, but we know what it really is. It's punishment. And guess whose names end up there most? The CEO didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already knew. The stalker's voice dropped even lower. They say it comes from higher up. Policy. Like the company built it this way. The CEO's stomach churned. He thought of the sleek binders of corporate policy back in headquarters, the slogans about accountability and efficiency. He had signed off on many of them himself. Had those very documents become weapons? Before he could respond, footsteps echoed from the corridor. The stalker paled. grabbed a box cutter, and pretended to slice open a carton. The manager's sharp voice carried through the warehouse. "Back to work, Martinez. I don't pay you to chat." The CEO slipped away before he could be noticed. He found himself near the break room next. The air smelled of burnt coffee and microwaved meals. A young black cashier sat slumped at a table, her uniform rumpled, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She jumped when she saw him, startled by a stranger in her space. "Sorry," he said quickly. "Didn't mean to intrude." She studied him warily, then sighed. "Don't worry, I'm just on break, if you can call it that." He sat across from her, tentative. "Long day?" She gave a humorless laugh. "Every day. They schedule me for 6 hours, then keep me for 10. But on paper, it still says 6. No overtime, no pay. If I complain, I'm gone. I've seen it happen too many times." The disguised CEO's chest tightened. The cashier leaned forward, whispering like someone confessing a crime. "It's not just here, it's everywhere. My cousin worked at another store, same thing. Hours stolen, breaks denied, and when she tried to report it, she ended up on that blacklist. Couldn't get a job in the company again." Her voice cracked. "I thought working here would help me save for school. But I'm stuck. Feels like I'm chained to this place." The CEO swallowed hard, forcing his expression to stay neutral. "That doesn't sound right." "Right?" she repeated bitterly. "Nothing's right here. But what choice do we have? Rent won't pay itself." Her words echoed in his mind as he stood to leave. What choice do we have? He had always believed his employees had choices, opportunities, ladders to climb. He had preached it in interviews, at conferences, in his book on leadership. But here, face to face with the people living under his policies, he saw the truth. The ladders were broken, and the only thing left was the cage. The restroom smelled faintly of bleach, the mop bucket still parked in the corner. The man in the brown coat pushed open the door and froze. The janitor was there again, crouched on the floor, his broad shoulders trembling. This time, he wasn't just quietly weeping. He was breaking. His sobs echoed against the tiled walls, raw and helpless. The undercover CEO stepped forward, his throat tightening. "Are you okay?" The older man startled, wiping his face quickly with the sleeve of his uniform. "I'm fine. Just allergies." He forced a laugh that didn't come close to hiding his pain. The CEO lowered his voice. "You don't have to lie to me." The janitor stared at the floor, lips trembling. At last, the words spilled out. "My little girl's in the hospital. Pneumonia. She's only 6. His voice cracked. "The doctor says she needs treatment, but I can't afford it. I asked for sick leave just 1 week. The manager said no. Said if I can't show up, they'll replace me. Replace me while my baby." His chest heaved with sobs. The CEO's fists clenched so tight his nails cut into his palms. He felt his heart roar with anger. Every fiber of him wanted to rip off the disguise, storm into the manager's office, and tear down the system that had let this happen. But he forced himself to stay still. The janitor shook his head bitterly. All they care about is the numbers, not people, not families. Just numbers. The CEO swallowed hard, his voice rough. "That's not right. That's not leadership." The janitor gave him a sharp look. "Leadership? You think leadership exists here?" "Nah, there's just bosses, and bosses don't listen." The words hit like knives. The CEO thought of the speeches he had given, the interviews where he bragged about listening to employees, the glossy reports filled with smiling faces. He thought of his leadership book, The Future of People-Centered Management Sold in Airports Worldwide. Was it all a lie? He crouched down, close enough to meet the janitor's tear-filled eyes. "If leadership came to you, real leadership, what would you want to say?" The janitor let out a bitter laugh. "I'd say, stop treating us like trash. We're not numbers. We're not disposable. We're human beings. That's all." The CEO's chest ached. He nearly said it then. "I am leadership. I am the man who built this company." But something held him back. "Not yet." He placed a steady hand on the janitor's shoulder. "Someone will hear you, I promise." The janitor's lips pressed into a trembling line. He looked away, whispering, "I've heard that before." The CEO rose slowly, the weight of his empire pressing down harder than ever. His disguise felt heavier now, almost suffocating. As he stepped back into the hallway, his reflection caught in the restroom mirror stopped him. A plain brown coat, a lowered cap. He looked like nobody, but behind the disguise, he knew. He was the one man who could change everything. And yet, for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if he had the right to call himself a leader at all. The store floor buzzed with the afternoon rush. Customers streamed through aisles, carts clattering, music chirping overhead. On the surface, everything looked smooth, but just beneath, tension simmered. The man in the brown coat lingered near the seasonal display, pretending to compare prices. His eyes, however, never left the front registers. The manager stood there, pacing like a predator, his expression taut with irritation. Then it happened. A young black stock clerk emerged from the back with a dolly stacked high with boxes. He maneuvered carefully through the crowd, sweat beading on his forehead. As he passed the registers, one box slipped, tumbling to the floor with a loud crash. Customers turned. The stock clerk froze, panic flashing across his face. The manager's voice thundered, slicing through the air. "Unbelievable! Can't even carry a box without making a scene." The clerk stammered, "I'm sorry, sir, it just..." "Sorry? Sorry doesn't clean up broken merchandise? Do you know how much that costs this company?" The manager's face reddened, his words spit like venom. "You're done. Get out. You're fired." The store went silent. Customers gawked, employees stared, nobody moved. The young man's lips parted, his eyes wide in disbelief. "Fired? For one accident?" The manager sneered. "Not just one. You've been on thin ice for months. Consider this your last mistake." The disguised CEO felt his stomach twist. He knew that tone, that power play. He had heard whispers of it in employee complaints filtered through official channels, but nothing prepared him for seeing it raw. The stock clerk's voice broke. "Please, I need this job. My mom, she depends on me. Don't do this." But the manager's expression hardened, his voice sharp enough to cut stone. "Pack your things. Security will walk you out." The young man's shoulders sagged. His eyes glistened as he bent to pick up the broken box, trying to salvage the mess, even as his world collapsed. Customers whispered uneasily. A mother shook her head, pulling her child closer. One cashier turned away, tears brimming in her eyes. The undercover CEO's fists clenched in his coat pockets. His heart thundered with rage. He wanted to shout, "Enough! This isn't leadership. This isn't who we are." He wanted to tear off the disguise and end the cruelty right there. But he forced himself to stay silent, his jaw locked, his phone once again recording in his pocket. The manager barked at another worker. "Clean this up, and remember efficiency, not excuses." The stock clerk pushed his dolly away slowly, his back bent as though the weight of the entire world pressed down on him. The CEO's chest ached, watching him disappear into the back corridors. He had built an empire to empower people, or so he thought. Now he watched that empire crush them, one by one. For the first time, a thought struck him with brutal clarity. Maybe I don't know my own company at all. He stepped out of the store moments later, the cold air hitting his face like a slap. His disguise shielded him from recognition, but it couldn't shield him from shame. Standing on the sidewalk, he whispered to himself, "If this is leadership, then I've failed." The city outside glowed with neon, the hum of traffic drifting up to the hotel window. In the room above, the man in the brown coat sat at a small desk, the disguise tossed carelessly onto the chair. The baseball cap lay crumpled, his coat folded neatly as though keeping order in his appearance could somehow restore order to the chaos inside his mind. The television on mute flashed headlines about markets and politics, but he wasn't watching. His eyes were fixed on the hardcover book lying open on the desk. The Future of People-Centered Leadership. His book, his words, his philosophy. He flipped through the pages, scanning the sentences he had once believed were gospel. Efficiency is the highest form of respect. Employees thrive under pressure. Leaders must never bend to weakness. Each line hit him like a stone. He remembered writing those phrases late at night, fueled by ambition, convinced he was shaping the next generation of business wisdom. He remembered the applause at conferences, The glowing reviews, the endless citations and articles praising his visionary leadership. And now he remembered the cashier's forced smile, the janitor's broken sobs, the young clerk begging not to lose his job. What if his words hadn't inspired greatness? What if they had armed cruelty? He shoved the book away, the sound of it slamming against the desk echoing in the quiet room. He rose, pacing across the carpet, his reflection in the window glaring back at him. A powerful black man who had broken barriers, who had built an empire from nothing, who had been celebrated as a symbol of progress. And yet, in the shadows of his own empire, people who looked like him were being crushed. The hypocrisy burned. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, running his hands over his face. The disguise was gone, but the weight of invisibility remained. How had he become so blind? Memories clawed at him. Board meetings where executives assured him that efficiency was improving. Quarterly calls where regional managers boasted about cutting costs. Reports where red ink turned to black after slashing labor hours. He had nodded, praised, rewarded them. And every nod, every clap on the back had trickled down into humiliation, exploitation, despair. He stared at the ceiling, whispering to himself, "What if I built the very system that broke them?" The thought terrified him. Not just because it might be true, but because it meant he could no longer blame bad managers or local problems. The rot was bigger, deeper. The hotel room felt like a cage. He grabbed the book again, flipping to the dedication, "For the employees who make everything possible." He laughed bitterly. What a cruel joke it must look like now. On the desk, his phone buzzed with a new email. He opened it absent-mindedly. Another report from headquarters, sterile and polished. Productivity metrics up 7 quarter to quarter. Labor costs reduced. Customer satisfaction steady. The words blurred as his anger boiled. Metrics, always metrics. But no mention of Jasmine, who had been humiliated at the register. No mention of Martinez, living under the fear of a blacklist. No mention of the janitor's sick daughter. He shut the phone off. The silence was deafening. In that silence, one truth crystallized. Tomorrow, he couldn't just observe anymore. He had to act. He slid the book into the trash can beside the desk, watching it slump against empty wrappers and paper cups. For the first time in his life, he felt the foundation of his leadership cracking, and he wasn't sure what would be built in its place. The morning sun cut sharp lines across the parking lot as he approached the store once more. This time, he wasn't there to pretend to shop. He wasn't there to eavesdrop or record. He wanted to step directly into the lives of the people who carried his empire on their backs. He had swapped his brown coat for a faded hoodie, his polished shoes for old sneakers. His hair was tucked under a cap. Nothing about him said CEO. Everything about him said disposable labor. At the back entrance, he hesitated only a second before pushing through. A shift supervisor stood at the door, clipboard in hand, scanning arrivals. She barely looked at him. "You here for work?" "Yes," he answered simply, keeping his voice low, steady. She shoved a form into his hand. "Sign this. Training's a joke, so don't expect much. Minimum wage, no overtime until you hit 90 days. You'll be shadowing janitorial today. Uniforms in that closet. No ID check, no verification, just another body to fill the gap." He signed with a false name, Marcus Brown, and slipped into the stiff, bleach-stained shirt she gave him. Minutes later, he was pushing a broom across the sales floor, invisible in plain sight. Customers brushed past him without a glance. Employees did too, except for one young stalker who gave him a tired nod of solidarity. It didn't take long to feel the weight of the system pressing down. A manager barked orders at him without even making eye contact. "Mop faster. Customers don't like to see you standing around." When he stopped to wring out the mop water, another snapped, "Break's over already? You just started." By the time 2 hours passed, his shoulders ached, sweat soaked through his borrowed shirt, and his knees protested every step. He thought of the janitor 8 years of this grind day after day, with no recognition, no relief. The thought hollowed him out. Near the stockroom, he overheard two cashiers whispering, not realizing the new guy was listening. They cut my check again. Said I clocked out late. Same here. They shave minutes off everyone's shifts. If you notice, they say it's a system error. Funny how the errors always go one way. They're stealing from us. And if you bring it up, you're on the list. The disguised CEO's jaw clenched. The blacklist again. Later, while hauling trash to the dumpster, he passed a group of employees on smoke break. One looked him up and down. First day, don't get too comfortable. They'll burn you out in a month. He forced a thin smile. You've been here long? Too long, the man said, flicking ash onto the pavement. We're cogs. Replaceable. That's the whole system. Don't matter if you're black, brown, whatever. They'll grind you down just the same, but... His voice dropped lower, bitter. Some of us get ground faster than others. The CEO felt those words settle heavy in his chest. Inside, he wiped down the break room tables. A laminated poster hung crooked on the wall. Our people are our greatest asset. He stared at it until his vision blurred. The slogan was his words, his philosophy, repeated in every store across the nation. And here it was, a cruel joke plastered above stolen wages, blacklists, and broken spirits. For the first time, he felt ashamed of his own signature. As the shift ended, the supervisor handed him a time card. Be back tomorrow, Marcus. We'll see if you can keep up. He nodded silently, slipping back into the evening air. His arms ached, his shirt clung damp to his skin, but it wasn't the labor that weighed on him. It was the truth. His empire had been built on foundations far shakier than he ever imagined. The break room was empty except for the hum of the vending machine and the flicker of a dying fluorescent bulb. The man in the bleach-stained uniform sat at a table, arms aching from hours of grunt work, when the janitor shuffled in. His steps were slow, heavy, as though each one carried the weight of years. The CEO, still hidden as Marcus, nodded in greeting. Long day? The janitor gave a weary laugh. Aren't they all? He sank into a chair, his mop leaning against the wall like a cane. For a moment, he rubbed his eyes, silent. Then, with a sigh, he spoke. You're new. Maybe you should know what you've walked into. The CEO leaned forward. I'm listening. The janitor hesitated, then shrugged. Doesn't matter if I tell you. Won't change a thing. I've been trying for years. Trying what? Getting someone to notice. His voice hardened. I've written letters to HR, to regional, even corporate. I wrote about the overtime theft, the harassment, the blacklists, about the chemicals they make us use without protection, about being screamed at for taking a 5-minute bathroom break. His eyes grew wet. Every time, nothing. Weeks later, I get a canned response. We've reviewed your concerns and found no violation. The CEO's throat went dry. He whispered, And you kept trying? The janitor nodded. Yeah, I thought maybe the right person would finally see it. But guess what? My complaints never make it out. They vanish. The manager still has his job, and I'm still here, begging for gloves while my daughter's in the hospital. He leaned back, laughter sharp and bitter. Sometimes I think the system is designed to bury us, not protect us. The CEO's heart pounded. He had signed off on those HR systems, had funded the software platforms, had approved the training decks filled with slogans about integrity and compliance. He had believed they were safeguards. Now he saw them for what they were, a wall, designed to keep voices like this from ever reaching him. The janitor's eyes locked onto his, tired but defiant. You'll see. You try to raise your voice, and they'll make sure it never leaves this store. That's how they win. They don't just silence you. They erase you. The CEO's fists tightened in his lap. His mind raced with every meeting, every polished report he had ever read. None of them had mentioned this, not once, because the system had been built to ensure he never saw it. For the first time, the realization hit with full force. This wasn't about one abusive manager. This wasn't about a single toxic store. This was structural. Entire layers of bureaucracy had been stacked like bricks, carefully arranged to hide the rot beneath. He wanted to scream, wanted to rip off the mask and say, "I am the one at the top. I am the one you've been trying to reach." But he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. If someone did listen, if someone truly heard you, what would you want them to do? The janitor blinked, surprised by the question. He thought for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Tear it all down. Not just the bad apples, the whole tree, because the roots are poisoned." The words echoed in the CEO's mind, chilling him. He left the break room later, his disguise still intact, but his illusions shattered. As he walked out into the cool night air, the company logo glowed above the store, bold and bright against the sky. For years, it had been a symbol of pride. Tonight it looked like a brand burned into the backs of those who suffered beneath it. And for the first time, he admitted the truth to himself. If he wanted to save his empire, he would have to destroy it first. The store was quieter than usual that morning, the lull between the early rush and the midday crowd. Sunlight streamed in through the wide glass doors, painting the aisles in warm light that made everything look deceptively calm. But tension still lived in the corners, in the hunched shoulders of cashiers, in the stiff silence of workers moving boxes in the back. The man in the faded janitor's uniform swept the floor near the registers, pushing the broom slowly, his disguise still intact. He had grown used to being invisible. Too used. Then he heard it. The sharp, cutting voice of the manager. "Late again, huh? That's 3 times this month." His words cut into a young cashier, a black teenager no older than 17. The boy held out his time card, stammering. "The bus was delayed, sir. I tried—" "Excuses," the manager snapped. "This is a business, not charity. If you can't even show up on time, you're not worth the payroll." The boy's eyes widened. "Please, I need this job. My mom—" "Save it," the manager barked. "Get your stuff. You're done." The air went still. Customers glanced uneasily, whispering. Employees froze in place, helpless, watching another one of their own crushed under the weight of power. The undercover CEO's chest burned. His hands tightened around the broom until it shook. He had promised himself he would wait. He would gather proof, uncover the system, expose it carefully. But watching this boy's face crumble was too much. He dropped the broom. The clang echoed like a gunshot. The manager spun toward him, sneering. "And you, why are you standing there? Back to work, or you're out too." For a long moment, the man in the janitor's uniform said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached up and pulled the cap from his head. The store's fluorescent lights caught his face fully for the first time. His posture shifted, no longer slouched, no longer hiding. He stood tall, eyes blazing. The room seemed to tilt as recognition rippled through it. The manager's sneer faltered. His jaw slackened. You're... "Yes," the man said, his voice deep, steady, commanding. "I am." The cashiers gasped. A stalker dropped his box. Even the customers seemed to freeze as the truth settled in. The man they thought was just another disposable worker was the billionaire CEO, the founder, the face they had only ever seen on glossy posters and corporate newsletters. The manager stammered, "Sir, I didn't know." "That's the problem," the CEO cut in, his voice sharp with fury. "You didn't know. You didn't care. And you thought no one would ever see." Silence swallowed the store. The young cashier stared at him, stunned, as if he couldn't believe someone with power had just spoken on his behalf. The CEO stepped forward, his gaze locked on the manager. "I came here to see my company. What I found was rot, humiliation, lives destroyed under the banner of efficiency." His voice rose, echoing through the aisles. "This is not leadership. This is cruelty." The manager's face drained of color. "Sir, if you'll let me explain—" "There is nothing to explain," the CEO thundered. "I've seen enough." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, one cashier set down her scanner and whispered, "Finally." Another employee nodded. A murmur of agreement spread like a wave. The CEO turned to them, his expression softening just enough. You deserve better, all of you. And from this moment forward, things will change. The store erupted in murmurs, some hopeful, some disbelieving, but every eye was locked on him, the leader they had never expected to stand in their corner. For the first time in years, the CEO felt the weight of his title return, not as a symbol of power, but as a promise. The conference room smelled faintly of stale coffee and fear. Regional managers sat stiffly around the polished table, their laptops open, their eyes darting nervously. The man at the head of the table, the CEO they had once only seen in glossy newsletters and keynote stages, looked very different now. His suit was immaculate, yes, but his eyes burned with something far sharper than corporate pride. On the screen behind him, footage played. The manager humiliating the cashier, the stock clerk being fired, employees whispering about stolen wages. Each clip was raw, shaky, recorded by the very man now glaring at them. "Explain this," the CEO demanded, his voice steady but cutting. One regional manager cleared his throat. "Sir, these are isolated incidents." "Isolated?" The CEO's fist hit the table, rattling glasses of water. "Do not insult me. I wore the uniform. I pushed the broom. I lived the lives of my employees for 3 days. This is not isolated. This is systemic." Silence. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Others stared at the table as though hoping it might swallow them whole. Another manager tried cautiously. "We follow the guidelines set by corporate—" "Yes," the CEO cut in, his voice low now, heavy. "And who wrote those guidelines?" The words hung in the air like a guillotine. They all knew the answer. He had. He turned toward the screen again, the images flickering across his face. The janitor sobbing in the restroom. The cashier forcing a smile through tears. The poster in the break room declaring, "Our people are our greatest asset." He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "These aren't just bad managers. These are my policies, my philosophies, my leadership, weaponized against the very people I swore to uplift." No one dared respond. He looked around the table, his gaze sharp as glass. "Tell me the truth. How long have you known—" One finally cracked, "Sir." "It's been this way for years. The systems reward it. Efficiency metrics, cost reductions, turnover goals, they all push us to squeeze harder. We thought it was what you wanted." The CEO closed his eyes briefly, the words cutting deeper than any accusation. What he wanted. What he had preached. He saw now how the gospel of efficiency had been twisted. Or perhaps it had never needed twisting at all. Perhaps it was rotten from the start. He opened his eyes, his voice steel. "No more." "But sir, shareholders—" "Shareholders can wait," he snapped. "If we destroy our people, there is no company left to own." The room went silent again. No one had ever heard him speak like this. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "I built this company to be a beacon. Instead, it became a cage. That ends today. The policies, the blacklists, the stolen hours, the culture of fear, burn it all down. From the ground up, we start over." Gasps rippled. Some whispered protests about costs, risks, upheaval, but the CEO silenced them with a single look. "You think I'm afraid of risk?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. "I've risked everything to build this empire, and I will risk it again to save it." He let the silence linger, then added softly, almost like a vow, "Leadership means nothing if it forgets humanity, and I will not forget again." The office was empty, the city skyline stretching out in glittering silence beyond the glass walls. Night had settled, and with it came the weight of everything he had seen. The CEO sat alone at his desk. Not the polished conference table of earlier, not the grand boardroom stage, but his private space bare, stark, stripped down. A single lamp cast a pale pool of light over the objects before him. A decanter half full of whiskey, a lighter, and the book that had once made him a star. The Future of People-Centered Leadership. His name gleamed across the cover in embossed gold. For years, that name had been his crown, his shield, his proof that he belonged in rooms where no one else looked like him. A black man at the helm of a global empire, proof that he had made it, proof that he had defied every statistic. But tonight, staring at the book, he felt no pride, only shame. He flipped through the pages. Words leapt back at him like accusations. Efficiency creates dignity. A company thrives when every worker is replaceable. Pressure separates the strong from the weak. His hand trembled. He remembered standing on stages, reciting those lines as gospel. He remembered applause, headlines, think pieces, praising his brilliance. And now he remembered the janitor weeping in the restroom, the cashier's hollow smile, the boy fired for being late because of a bus. He slammed the book shut. The sound echoed in the empty office like a gunshot. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring. His reflection in the glass looked back at him, hard lines carved into his face, eyes hollowed by the truth. He had become the very thing he once vowed to fight, a leader who had forgotten his people. With a slow breath, he picked up the lighter. The flame flickered to life, small but fierce. He touched it to the corner of the page. The paper curled, blackening, then caught. The fire spread hungrily, devouring his words, his legacy. He dropped the book into a metal waste bin, watching as the flames grew, crackling, casting wild shadows across the walls. Smoke curled upward, stinging his eyes. He didn't look away. It wasn't just a book burning. It was an admission, an execution of his old self. When the flames finally died, leaving only ash, he leaned back in his chair. The air smelled of smoke and endings, but also, strangely, of beginnings. His voice, rough but steady, broke the silence. If I built a cage, I'll build the key. From nothing if I have to. For the first time since stepping into that store in disguise, he felt a strange clarity. Terrifying, yes, but also liberating. He had destroyed the textbook of his old leadership. Now he had no choice but to write a new one this time, not with words, but with action. Outside the window, the city pulsed with life, unaware of the revolution that had just begun in one quiet office. The morning light poured through the store's glass doors, illuminating shelves neatly stocked, aisles clear, registers buzzing with steady rhythm. But this time, the energy was different. The man in the tailored suit walked slowly through the space he had once entered in disguise. No coat pulled low, no false name, no broom in his hand. Today, he was not hiding. Today, he was here as himself, the CEO, fully seen, and everything had changed. The janitor pushed his mop across the tile with a steady rhythm, but there was no slump in his shoulders now. His eyes were brighter, his steps lighter. He had been granted paid leave to care for his daughter, and when he returned, he was welcomed, not threatened. A new set of gloves and equipment lay neatly stacked in his cart's small things, but to him, they meant respect. The young cashier, Jasmine, scanned items with ease. The smile she wore now was not forced. It came naturally as she greeted customers who noticed the change in her demeanor. She had been promoted to a senior role, her wages adjusted fairly. The boy who had been fired stood at the door again, this time in a crisp new uniform. "Welcome," he said proudly to customers as they entered. A chance restored. The manager who had once ruled with fear was gone. In his place stood a woman from another store, chosen not for her ability to hit quotas, but for the way her former team spoke about her. Words like fair, kind, listener. The CEO walked slowly down the aisle, taking it all in. Employees whispered to each other as he passed, but the whispers carried no fear. Instead, there was awe and something more. Hope. At the front of the store, cameras clicked. Reporters had gathered, word spreading fast that the billionaire CEO was personally visiting a branch that had once been infamous for mistreatment. He stepped up to a small podium hastily set near the registers. His gaze swept the room, employees, customers, journalists, all waiting for him to speak. He took a breath. "For years," he began, his voice steady, resonant, "I believed I knew what leadership meant. I believed efficiency and discipline would build strength. I believed numbers told the whole story. He paused, letting the silence hold. I was wrong. Murmurs rippled. Employees exchanged glances. Reporters scribbled furiously. I went undercover in this very store. I wore the uniform, pushed the broom, carried the boxes, and I saw with my own eyes how our systems broke people, how our words became weapons, how our pursuit of efficiency erased dignity. He leaned forward, his voice heavy with conviction. That is not leadership. Leadership means nothing if it forgets the people it is meant to serve. The janitor at the back lowered his mop, listening. The cashier leaned forward. The boy by the door straightened. From this day forward, the CEO declared, this company will not measure success in profit alone. We will measure it in people, how we protect them, how we lift them, how we honor their humanity. He glanced toward the employees. Because without you, there is no company. You are not replaceable. You are the foundation. And leadership begins here, with you. Applause erupted, not the polite applause of investors, but the raw, grateful applause of people who had finally been seen. The CEO stepped down from the podium, walking not toward the cameras, but toward the workers. He shook hands, exchanged smiles, listened to their stories. For the first time, his leadership wasn't written in books or displayed on screens. It was lived in real lives, in real change. As the camera flashbulbs faded and the sunlight shifted, one thought lingered in his mind. He had burned his old textbook. Now he was writing a new one, written not in words, but in people's faces, in their laughter, in their restored hope.